allowing my heart to dream? Because it's not just dream big and dream about what you want, but am I actually allowing myself to see beyond my abilities, to see beyond the life that I know I can give myself and the life I know I can give my family? Can I see beyond that? Because like you said, taking a step of faith outside of your comfort zone, it's going to be bigger than what you can accomplish on your own.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. It is spring. Spring is in the air, and last episode we were talking about hindrances, and we were talking about Mark 4 and the things in our life that can kind of hinder us from being able to go into that next season and to grow. And so now that that's covered, we want to talk about what you can do in this season so that you can grow. And we're in that time where we're starting to want to plant plants and everything. And
it's hard. I want to, but we live in Colorado.
It's not quite, Other places are actually dealing with spring weather, and we're getting a snowstorm tomorrow or something possibly.
Yeah, so. it's okay.
Yeah. But with growth and with plants, there's few things that you can do to make sure that they do, they're healthy and that they produce and everything, like watering, fertilizing. So we want to talk about what things can we do in our life similar to those that can help us grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like Felicia said, last week we talked about those hindrances that maybe we overlook or don't want to look at. And those are the things that can a lot of times stop a lot of the growth, like it talks about in Mark 4. So we really encourage you to check that episode out if you haven't, because you can do all the right things to help it grow. But if you've got weeds, if you've got shallow soil, if you've got rocks, and you can do all the right things, but if you ignore these other things that are trying to grow up and choke the growth that you're seeing, then you're not really going to see much results. But on a more positive note, this week, we're going to talk about some of those things that can really kind of help accelerate that growth. And some of them you might not even have thought about before, but I do think all of these things are just kind of subtle ways, again, not to deserve growth or deserve the promises of God. They're freely given to us as his children. But with the soil of our hearts, there are some things that we can do, like you said, how you use with plants, you water, you fertilize, and these things make a difference in the quality and quantity of the fruit that you see.
Exactly.
And so that's what we want to talk about.
Yeah. And one of the things that came to mind first was actually something we've been talking about quite a bit in the last few episodes. Comfort zones, we talk about these a lot. And they're one of the main things that can really keep us from being able to grow and expand. And whenever I think about comfort zones, I think about the time and the transition from me moving to Florida, which I think was 5 years ago now.
Wow, yeah.
Possibly over 5 years ago.
That's crazy.
Which is just so crazy. But that transition from moving to Florida to coming to Colorado, and that season was exciting for me. I mean, I was getting married, and it was exciting too because I was just excited to live in a place that had snow and everything. And we had
you
friends.
Got plenty of it now.
We had friends here, but it was a stretch for me too. There was family back in Florida, and there was a lot of changes. So it was good and bad. But when I moved here, I started to really notice the ways in which I was kind of just growing as a person. And I remember very specifically, and I still treasure what he said, but my brother-in-law had reached out to me. Shout out to Robbie. He had texted me, and he had mentioned something about, I've seen such a change in you as a person and how much you've grown and been able to take on your capacity. And when he said that, and a few people had said the same thing, it made me think about if I was a plant, and if I was in a very small little pot, like this little pot, that's kind of how I was in Florida. I was comfortable. I had everything I needed, and I didn't really need to go out of my comfort zone very often because there was really no reason that I had to really stretch myself too much. And that was a great environment. But when I went to Colorado, I grew so much more than I had in Florida. And I, learned new things and met new people. And it just made me think about how I basically was like a plant that had been moved into a bigger pot, and at first it's kind of uncomfortable, and it's like, you have all this extra space, but then you're actually able to fill in that space.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about all of the really big things in my life as well that have been just the most valuable, most incredible things that I've had in my life, and they've all been very similar, where it was like, okay, I'm going into this bigger pot.
Yeah.
And it's scary.
It
and
is.
It's weird because when you talk about it, like right now, you go, well, why wouldn't you do it? It sounds amazing. It sounds like a great opportunity. But in the moment, it can feel so terrifying, because you're like, what if I'm making the wrong decision?
Oh,
What
for
if
sure.
I don't, what if I'm not able to handle this?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think just realizing that no growth can come until you step out of that comfort zone is just such an important point, because God calls us out, right? He calls us to a life that is so different than how other people see it. And the only way you're going to be a trailblazer is if you actually step out in front of people and start going a direction that others haven't before. And then you'll see people follow, and you'll make a way for those people. But it's so scary. But honestly, that's where the adventure is.
It's true. Yeah.
And it is true that the most growth I've seen in my life as well has been a result of those big decisions, where I felt like I was stepping into something that was so much bigger than the comfort zone that I had created. And even to this day, I feel like there are things that God's kind of trying to challenge me on and be like, you've got this comfort zone, and I really, really need you to step out of it,
Yeah.
And so it's a constant thing, but it's so rewarding.
I think God's always going to be pushing us into that next thing, because I think comfort zones are basically like control, and it doesn't take a lot of faith to stay in your comfort zone. And I know that when I am comfortable and I'm looking at these things that I want to do, I'm like, oh, I wish I could just do this. I wish I could be better at this. And it's like, the only way you're really going to learn how to be better is to go and do it, and that takes more faith.
It really does. And it kind of makes me think of, I hope this illustration works, because it's popping up in my head, and I think it makes sense, but it makes me think of when I was learning gymnastics. I did gymnastics from the time I was 3 through high school. And something that's kind of interesting that a lot of people don't realize is when you're learning to do a back handspring, which is when you jump backwards, your hands hit the ground, and then your feet go over, right?
Yeah,
so
I never learned that one. It was tough.
I'm like, it's not as scary as the back tuck, but your hands go down, right? Well, so I remember towards the end of like my high school career and stuff, we were doing gym practice, and I remember one of the coaches was kind of using me as like this example. He's like, hey, can you please do this so people can see? Because he was trying to get this point across to some of the girls that were struggling with their back handspring. Because if you don't do it right, it's so hard. It's like, it feels so hard to get your body around. But when you know how to do it properly, it's honestly like, it doesn't feel like it takes a lot of effort. And so what it was is what the coach would try to do is he would start off by having you do your sit back. And so what that is before you do your back handspring at all, he has you, I wish I could demo.
Let's see it.
Yeah, I'll stand on the table. But you sit back with your arms back, and then that's when you jump. That's when you jump back, right? And so, but at first the coach tries to get you to get that sit back right. And a lot of girls, they sit back, but they hold themselves up, almost like a squat, right? And then they like do that, and then they try to go back. And he was trying to show how I was doing it, which, not to be braggy, right? But it sounds really braggy. But he kind of had his hand behind my back and stuff, but I knew what was happening, so it wasn't a shock. But I sit, and then I fall on the ground, because I'm sitting so far back that I can't actually hold myself up. Like my butt is so far back, like if you can picture that, right? Like that if I stop there, I fall on my butt, because like I'm sitting so far behind my feet that I can't actually hold myself up.
I'll put a little diagram in.
We'll do a demo later. But basically you have to sit that far back in order to be able, and then when you jump back, your body is like in that backwards movement that it's so much easier. But what these girls are afraid of is they're afraid of going backwards. And so they kind of like stop, and then they try just throw their body backwards, and it goes, and then a lot of times you go up really high, and then that's when you go on your head, and then it can just be hard, right? Like you're like, man, why isn't this working? And so I remember I did it, and I hit the ground, of course, and all the girls were like, oh no. Like, no, it's okay, that was supposed to happen. And so I think a lot of times this is kind of, in a sense, what happens with coming out of our comfort zone. God is saying, look, I know you want to catch yourself. I know you want to be able to have a safety net. I know you want to be able to no, but what if it doesn't work? What if I can't do it? But he's like, it's going to be so much easier. Trust me. If you just come back with me and step out of your comfort zone, it will work out so much easier. It takes way less effort to actually do it this way than when you're trying to save yourself at the same time as you're taking a leap of faith.
Yeah.
A leap of faith requires that you are completely out there to where if you don't catch me,
I'm going to fall on my head.
Then I'm going to fall on my butt or my head or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And, and that's okay. He's there for us. But we want to pretend like we're taking a leap of faith, but we're really kind of like holding on. Yeah. And then we wonder why things are so hard.
Yeah.
All right, so one area that I thought of when it comes to how to allow yourself to kind of grow into this next season is to allow yourself to dream. And kind of going along with what you just said about stepping out of your comfort zone, we live in the age of vision boards and, declare it and everything. And I've just never really been that kind of person. And I do think that there is a ditch that you can get into with just, trying to almost getting obsessed with how you think your life is supposed to turn out. And that's not what I'm talking about. But I do think that sometimes we get comfortable, right? We get in our comfort zones and then we stop dreaming, or we get insecure and we stop dreaming, or we get fearful and we stop dreaming, or we get busy and we stop dreaming. And I think a lot of times we need to kind of check back in with ourselves and go, am I allowing my heart to dream? Because it's not just dream big and dream about what you want, but am I actually allowing myself to see beyond my abilities, to see beyond the life that I know I can give myself and the life I know I can give my family? Can I see beyond that? Because like you said, taking a step of faith outside of your comfort zone, it's going to be bigger than what you can accomplish on your own. If you can create a map for it, then it's probably not the full picture
for sure
of what God wants to do in your life. And so just taking that time to dream and be like, okay, God, am I scared to dream? Am I being fearful? Am I afraid to think of what this next season might mean? Am I insecure about what this next season might mean? Or am I too in my comfort zone to think about what this next season might mean? And just kind of allow the Holy Spirit to break down some of those barriers, and then just let yourself dream and let yourself enjoy it. It says in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the substance of things hoped for. And too often Christians are going around without any hope, but they're trying to declare things and declare things and declare things and have faith for things. But if you don't have hope and a vision and a dream in your heart, there's nothing for faith to latch onto and bring into substance into this world.
Yeah, it makes me think of that verse. And it says that forgetting what was behind you and focusing on what's ahead. Yeah. And I think something that can keep us from doing that actually is like shame in our life. Things that we've done in the past, like being so focused on things that you did wrong. So you don't think that God is even wanting or can bring you into something bigger because you don't think you are deserving of that. Right. Yeah. But like just God wants us to forget about the things that went wrong in the past. And he also doesn't want us to dwell on the past, always thinking about, oh, that time was so much better, because I deal with that. Like that's something I do a lot, is like, oh, that time was better. I wish stuff was like that again. Like I felt like that in certain seasons of my life. But I think God really wants us to keep our eyes on the future so that we can be prepared, but we can also have a vision for what's ahead of us. So another way that we can really experience growth in our life is being willing to listen to other people around us. And a lot of times when I'm like in situations with other people, I like to think about the fact that I feel like there's always people, and whoever you talk to, like they know something I don't know, or they've experienced something I haven't, or they have like maybe a healthier perspective on something that I don't. And I just like to kind of think about that sometimes, because it can be easy for us when we've done something for a long time. Like maybe it's the job that we're in, or maybe, you know, like you're a parent and you've been a parent for a really long time, and you're looking at a person who's just like become a parent, and you think like, oh, I know so much they don't know, right? So just kind of having like that humility in certain situations to be willing to listen to counsel and advice from other people. And one thing that I really think about when it comes to this topic is age, because you think about like older people can tend to look at younger people and they can say, you know, like, oh, they're immature or they're unexperienced, right? So you don't feel like you need to listen to them. Like they don't have anything for me. But then younger people can also lean more towards like arrogance of, oh, well, as a culture and just over time, we've learned so much like medically, and we've expanded, and like the culture's changed. And so their views and their knowledge is outdated. And so I wanted to read these two verses really quick because they kind of point at both of those points. In 1 Peter 5:5, it says, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders, clothe yourself, all of you, with humility towards one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So God's telling us, you know, those who are young, like, don't be proud around elder people, you know, respect them, be willing to listen to what they have to tell you. But then in 1 Timothy 4:12, it says, let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word. I know you've used that verse before, and I really like that, because not only is it like, okay, younger people just, they're always more naive than the older people, but there's also situations where like there's stuff that we can bring as younger people or people younger than us, like that can teach us things, that can bring stuff to the table. So just being willing to be humble and to keep an open mind will keep you from getting stagnant, feeling like, oh, I've learned all I need to learn on this topic, or I've learned everything I need to learn in this job. Like being willing to hear from people who not only are different from you culturally, but also just different from you generationally, I guess.
No, that's so good.
Yeah.
I remember I felt like I was kind of struggling with, you can kind of feel when you're starting to get a little arrogant, you know? I think you can kind of just feel it. And I think sometimes things happen over and over again, and then you just kind of develop that attitude, and then you're like, okay, I need to back off a bit. And I feel like I was going through one of those times, and I felt like I was just dealing with some difficult people, which we have an episode on, so you can check that out. Very good one. But I felt like God was kind of sharing with me exactly what you're saying of, how about, like, I don't remember exactly what he said because it was not an audible voice, but it was just something I felt inside of me. I felt like God was telling me, you know, there's something you could learn from everyone.
Exactly.
And I thought, you're right. And I thought, it's so arrogant of me to think I can't, you know? And it doesn't mean that I should learn everything from everyone, right?
For sure.
There's some people where I'm like, okay, I'm learning what not to do right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And that's okay and that's good. But I kind of started, and I don't do this perfectly, but it does help me, especially when I'm dealing with situations that are difficult or people that are difficult. I try to think like, what can I learn from this person right now? And it's not always just like what not to do, because then that still puts you kind of up here, right? But what can I actually learn from this person? And I think it really helps. There's this podcast that Jeff and I listen to a lot, and I do recommend it. It's called The Art of Manliness podcast, which sounds like it's geared towards men, and it is, but there are so many episodes. I mean, it's really for women as well. It's just, they're so interesting. He has all these experts on in all these fields, and the topics, you know, some, you know, like how to gain muscle, like I don't, you know, care so much about, but some of them are just so interesting. And there was one, and he was talking to this expert. I don't remember exactly what, but he was very successful. And he was talking about some of those keys to his success. And one of them he said is, I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but he said something about how he always kind of puts himself out of his comfort zone and learns something new. He puts himself in a situation where he's not the expert and he's learning something new. He's out of his comfort zone. He has to start from scratch, right? Whether it's a sport or a hobby or something, he's always doing that. And he says it keeps him, just like you're saying, in that mental state of, there's more for me to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
And that carries over into your work and into your place of expertise, because you realize, man, there's a lot I can learn in general. And it just kind of bleeds over into all of that. And yeah, if you think you know everything, you won't grow.
Exactly. You'll just be stagnant. And like I said in the beginning, it's not always about knowledge necessarily. But like even in the Bible, when it says like the faith of a child, right? Like maybe it's just perspectives. Like what perspective do younger people have, or older people have, or somebody you just met? What perspective do they have, or that's
culture.
Healthy, or culture? Yeah,
That's been a big one for me as I've done some traveling. It just,
that's huge. Yeah,
it really hits me, some of the things that we as Americans, or even as Christian Americans, would think is wrong or weird, and then you see it and you're like, oh man, they're so genuine. And you just, I don't know, it really changes your perspective. That's why I think travel is so important for
sure.
people to do. But it's just changing your perspective to realize that there are so many different people and cultures.
Exactly.
All right, another point I thought of when it comes to kind of growing our capacity for this next season is to develop an attitude of joy. And I specifically talk about this one after allowing yourself to dream, because I think what happens is a lot of times we start dreaming, and this has happened to me so many times, is I finally am like, okay, God, I'm going to take the limits off. I'm going to dream with you. And I'm going to, and then I start seeing things, and I feel like God is kind of like preparing me for another season. And then I get so obsessed with that next season and the dreams and the things that like are stirring in my heart that I get so discontent with where I'm
unsatisfied. Yeah.
Very unsatisfied. And don't get me wrong, I do believe there is a holy dissatisfaction. I believe God will stir up a holy dissatisfaction in you when he wants to kind of nudge you forward and get you to leave the comfort zone. But I think that if we just live our lives in a state of always wishing for the next season and always just being like, well, when I'm out of this busy season, or when the kids are grown, or when my husband, gets this promotion, or when we have a bigger house, or when we have more money, or when we have, it's like we always put off our joy and put off our happiness and put off our contentment until like the next season that we think is coming. And I think kind of like what we talked about last week with some of the hindrances, it's like, no, until you learn to do this now, until you learn to have an attitude of joy now, then you won't actually be content and have an attitude of joy in the season that you think will bring you joy, because something else will come up. Something else will be a struggle, and then you'll think, oh, well, when this is done and when this is done. It's less about the physical things and circumstances and more about like what we're talking about, what's going on in our heart, the garden of our heart, the plant we're growing on the inside of us. And I say attitude of joy because I do believe it's an attitude.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Happiness is an emotion. It's a feeling, and that's great. But joy is a fruit of the Spirit, and it's something that we can choose. But it doesn't come easily. It doesn't just come naturally, and I think we have to practice it. You have to practice joy. And so I noticed for me, like I said, I felt like I was getting kind of obsessed with like what that next season might look like and what our future might look like. And while it's good to get excited and stir up yourself, hope deferred makes the heart sick. It says in the word.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we start seeing the plans God has for us, we attach deadlines to them and time frames that God never put on them. And so we think, why is this taking so long? Why is this taking so long? And then our hearts become sick because we feel like our hope is being deferred when God never said this is happening in a month or a year or, by this date that you solemnly decided was going to be the date or season. And so I think in order to keep our hearts from becoming sick with not seeing that hope come to pass, it's just so important to develop an attitude of joy and just be thankful for what you have now
Yeah.
and find the joy in it. Find ways to celebrate life and have fun and take vacations and have parties. We have so many parties.
Yeah.
We love
We
to
do.
like get together and have parties.
Lots
and
of dressing up
lots
too.
of dressing up for, all different kinds of themed parties that we do. And it's just fun. And I can see the joy on people's faces because it's like life is lived in these moments. Life is passing us by. And if we don't choose to enjoy the days that we're living in now, then it's just going to pass us by so quickly. And when we think we get what we think will make us happy, there's just going to be more distractions because the enemy knows he can distract you and keep you from living in joy. And in Nehemiah, it says the joy of the Lord is your strength. And if you want strength for this next season, then you have to choose joy now.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, just like that feeling of uncontentment with where you are, but balancing that with being grateful for the things in your life. Because I know, like, I think about this verse a lot, and it's when it says, like, before you pray, or when you go to pray, like, give thanks to God for everything, and then let him know all that, like, what you're needing, like, then tell him your requests. And I think the reason that it says that very specifically in that order is because it's really important for us to focus our minds on all the things that we do have and all the things that we're grateful for now before we come to God and be like, okay, now, like, I need this and I want this. And like, I think it's very on purpose the way that verse is laid out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You spend some time being grateful for what you have and realizing how much God has blessed you. Then by the time you get to your request, it's kind of like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, I would like this, but man, I'm so blessed. And it just, it does shift your heart into an area of thanksgiving. And that is really a weapon against the enemy.
It's true.
All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like it and subscribe to our channel because we have lots of amazing episodes coming at you this spring.
And if you didn't know, we're also on Instagram and Facebook, so make sure to check us out on there. And until next week, remember
To have courage.
and be kind.